So I'm John Paul Saalwaechter, the engineering manager for the aeronautics division. And I want to take a minute to kind of reflect on last year. I'm going to call your attention to one of the flyers that you received as part of your handouts. So if you look, we've got a legal size document, kind of like a poster board type of material. And that is a new and improved flyer on ACIP development. So this is a lot of what we covered last year. It was, I like to call it the P's of planning. Your purpose, your principles, your primary resources, the priorities, the process to it. So that's largely what we focused on last year. So hopefully this is a good resource for you to take back, pin it up on your board or on your wall, and just have that as kind of a reminder for the framework that we want to use going through this process. So this year I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to talk about the phasing and timing of development for your capital improvement projects. So if we look, there's 4 primary development phases. You've got planning, land, design, and construction. So pay very close attention to this because we are going to have a quiz after the break. No, I'm kidding. We will test your knowledge of this, though. We've got a couple exercises that we're going to run through to make this a little more tangible. So initially it's going to feel more conceptual and kind of principle in nature, but we're going to bring that back home and so that you can see exactly why you need this knowledge. So my goal is not to turn everybody into a project manager. I've already got 7 that that I have to keep track of. So they're great, but we don't need more project managers. You all have a different role and responsibility within the system. It's more the ownership and operation of the airport. So my goal this morning is just to create a shared understanding around these development phases. So with that, it's a shared understanding of the fact that there's a proper progression to go through these. There really are no shortcuts. And every project that you have is going to go through these. Now, some may be easier. Some, it's very easy to check the box of, do we have adequate land rights? Yeah. It's our runway. Of course we own the land. Some don't require as much study to get through design. It's, basic maintenance work, and it's easy. So some go a little bit faster, a little bit easier than others, but I promise you they all follow this progression. And when we try to take shortcuts or skip a step, it often will lead to additional expenses, additional delay. So it's very important to follow this progression. I want to create a shared understanding with each phase or sub-phase that there are certain requirements that TDOT has to begin that phase, and then you should have certain expectations coming out of it, certain deliverables that you've received from your consultant. So I'm not going to dive too much into the process that happens in each phase, because that's not your concern. That's where you're hiring your airport consultant to really run the process. What you need to know is, how do I start that process? How do I give TDOT what they need to feel confident and allocate the money towards it? And then what should I have coming out of that? I want to create a shared understanding that of those deliverables, there are key pieces that enable advancement for that progression to the next phase. And then I want to create a shared understanding around the impact that this has on your ACIP. So one way to think of it is that each phase or sub-phase could be a grant or maybe an amendment. So as we look at, maybe you'll have a planning grant or a grant for land acquisition. And that grant's going to start off with maybe just obtaining some information so that we can move further, and then we'll amend that to go into the actual acquisition. So when you're thinking about this process, instead of it being more just conceptual, think of this in terms of kind of grants and or amendments that you'll have to request from the division. And really this touches on the cash flow problem that Michelle mentioned. So if we're breaking up these pieces and kind of balancing that revenue with that cash flow, and we're not over allocating money, we're not tying up construction dollars early on in the process when really we're just trying to acquire the land before before design's even underway, then we're going to have better cash flow, and we're going to be able to fund those projects that are designed and bid and ready for construction. So we'll talk about each primary phase here. And we'll start with planning. Across the top, you'll notice that we've got that flow or that graphic in there to kind of reiterate where we are in that process. So Jordan already did a great job of covering planning, really talking about some of the requirements there, some of the deliverables, and even TDOT's role in that process. I just want to reiterate a couple of key points associated with this. So the first one being having a current ALP. So any type of proposed capital improvement development that you have has to be on an approved ALP. So that is a prerequisite or requirement, if you will, for issuance of a grant showing development. And with this process, that means that it's gone through FAA, it's gone through all their lines of business. Flight Standards has looked at it, the Air Force has looked at it. Any stakeholder in that process has been able to review the information on that project and give it the go-ahead. Secondly, who expects to receive federal money for future projects? We hope to receive a lot. I hope you do too. Now with that, there are certain stipulations called the grant assurances. And Grant Assurance 29 basically says that any sponsor who has received a grant for development must keep the ALP up to date at all times. So not only does that apply to the ALP, but the same goes for the Exhibit A. That's another planning document that we have to keep. We really have to keep current as we go through. And that's just in compliance with Grant Assurance 29. So now we can move on to land. Now with land, there are so many uncertainties as we go through that process. There's uncertainty about the amount of time it's going to take to get through the land acquisition or to purchase that easement. The cost. A lot of times you have to get into negotiation, you have to have multiple appraisals done and review appraisals, so cost is an uncertainty. Even just the attainment of the property can be an uncertainty sometimes. Maybe that property has been in that family for 100 years and they're just not willing to sell. It's not going to happen. So because we have all those uncertainties with land, I want you to think, okay, I have to have acquisition and then I can do development. We're not going to combine the two. They really have to be distinct and separate. And we're going to require sponsors to have adequate land rights before moving forward. So this really is a priority, and it has to be done separate from the other phases of development. Now within land, you have kind of a special category or special case, and that's your runway protection zone or your RPZ. So here we're not actually building anything. In fact it's the opposite. We want to prevent anything from being built or growing in that area. So the objective here is just for the sponsor to have sufficient interest in that RPZ area to protect from both obstructions and incompatible land use. So there are three ways that we can go about achieving this. We can have a purchase of the property in fee or fee simple. You can have the purchase of an easement, or we can rely upon adequate zoning. So you've got some options there, but we'd really like to see one or even a combination of those three for that land associated with the RPZ. So this is kind of a newer effort. In 2012, the FAA issued interim guidance around this, and I know that's probably difficult to read, but I'll boil it down for you. Basically, for anything new or any type of modified land use within the RPZ, there are certain land uses that are going to require coordination with the FAA, and often that coordination is in the form of an alternatives analysis, basically saying that you've looked at all the different options, you've assessed those, and you're picking the best one to move forward with. So really there's kind of two categories here of land uses that require coordination with FAA. You have one that is protecting the people and property on the ground. So it's it's any places of kind of public assembly where people might gather. So think certain buildings and structures, schools, hospitals, recreational centers, other medical facilities, or even industrial buildings where you have a lot of workers. Recreational land use, so even golf courses, amusement parks, ball fields, again, places where people gather, you have public assembly. Even transportation facilities, so bus stops, parking lots, or like, passenger rail facilities. So you've got that, where places where people gather, and then you have areas where there's dangerous storage. So hazardous materials, fuel storage, wastewater treatment, even above ground utility infrastructure. So now we're talking electrical substations. So these are all land uses that are really kind of incompatible for the aeronautics or aviation operations. So the FAA just wants to be sure that we're assessing those, mitigating where we can, and picking the best option. So as we get into land, there's a certain amount of information that we have to gather to be able to kind of progress through that. So as we start off, and you'll see this pretty consistently in each phase, our requirements are going to be that you've got a letter where you're requesting the funding, you've got a summary of the costs associated with that phase or sub-phase, and then you've got a schedule so that we can tailor the term of the grant to the events that are happening, and we can really watch those milestones and help you progress through that in a timely manner. And then coming out of that, you have certain actions and expectations you should expect. So the study phase with land, now we're looking at doing property survey and property description, the appraisals, the environmental review associated with that, and ultimately the negotiations so that we can have known land costs. It's that known land cost, that's that key piece that's going to enable advancement into the next phase, which would be acquisition. So if I've started my land grant, now I'm going to amend it once I have known land costs so that I can move forward with those transactions. So you'll have the transactions, you'll have the associated fees with that, like closing fees. As Jordan mentioned, we're going to also provide funding for an Exhibit A property map update so we can keep that current. And then ultimately, how do you demonstrate that you have adequate land rights? What would be the gold standard for showing that you have adequate land rights? I'll give you a hint, it's in bold. So, evidence of a good title. If you've got a good title on that property, it's yours. You can do anything you want with it at that point. So that's the piece that's going to enable advancement so that we can get to the fun part, which is the capital improvement work. So now we're able to get into the design phase. We have similar requirements on our end, but that cost, we're able to better define that, and that's really the professional services involved with the preliminary study. So we need the letter, we need a man-hour estimate and fee proposal from the airport consultant for their preliminary services, and a schedule as well. And then you should expect certain deliverables coming out of that. So you're going to get certain reports. They're going to do a subsurface investigation or a geotechnical report. Coming out of that, you should have a preliminary report. And this is all gathering the information and putting it together so that you can make an informed decision on whether to move forward and how much that project's really going to cost. So also with this phase, you're going to get through the environmental clearance, and you're going to have the environmental review document done coming out of that. So the key deliverable here that's going to enable advancement further into design is the itemized opinion of probable construction costs. So as we're going through the planning phase, the ACIP process, and we put that taxiway rehabilitation project on the ACIP, at that point it's just an order of magnitude estimate. So we're just kind of throwing it out based on experience to say, well, that's going to be around $2 million. But there could be a lot of variance in that number, so we want to refine that a little bit more so that everyone involved has a better understanding of what the scope is. So we want an itemized opinion of probable construction costs. That it's still not exactly how much it's going to cost. It's going to maybe be 30% higher to say 20% lower than what the actual costs are anticipated to be. But it gets us closer. So at that point, we can use that to assess the appropriateness of the professional service fees to go into the full design in the bidding phase. So that's our key requirement coming out of preliminary study that we're going to use to evaluate whether or not the price that you're going to pay for final design and bidding is appropriate. So we're going to relate that to the man-hour estimate and fee proposal for design and bidding or negotiation services, and establish the kind of scope and fee relationship to what we're actually building in the end. So at that point, you've gone through some of the tough decisions. You know a lot of the information about the project. You know the condition of the soil and all of that, and so you're able to make a more informed decision. So those are the requirements that you need to begin the final design and bidding or negotiation phase. And coming out of that, you're going to have a lot more deliverables at this point. So you can kind of separate those out. You've got your final design deliverables, and then you're going to have your bidding or negotiation deliverables. So I won't cover all these, but of these final design deliverables, there are certain ones that are going to allow you to bid that out to contractors. So those would include the plans and specifications, the construction schedule, the bid book, and contract specs. So those are some of your key deliverables that allow you to advertise that to the industry. And then during that bidding or negotiation phase, now we're able to have certain deliverables, including bid tabulations. So at that point, we have known costs for construction. So we have a lot more confidence moving forward with that than we do with, say, that cost estimate that was derived even earlier. And as Michelle mentioned, we've got a lot of unpredictability with our market. So despite how hard we all try to track pricing and get a handle on what contractors might charge, we're not contractors. At the end of the day, we're just not. So we ultimately can't say exactly how much it's going to cost, and especially in a market where you have just so much demand that they can really charge a premium for their work. So we need to get to a point where we have bids in hand, and that's going to allow us to move forward with construction much more confidently, where we don't have these issues of receiving a bid and it being higher than our construction grant that we've already awarded. So with bids in hand, then we can move forward with a construction grant. Along with that, we're going to need the man-hour estimate and fee proposal for professional services associated with that, and also with the closeout services. And again, we're going to do a scope and fee relationship to the actual construction cost. Because at the end of the day, that's what it should relate back to. What are we building? How involved is that? That's how involved the professional services are going to be for design and also the oversight and inspection of that work. And then you've got a lot of deliverables coming out of the construction process too, and closeout. So won't touch on all these, but your punch list and substantial completion are very important. DBE participation, especially if you're using federal money, that is a primary requirement associated with that. So, and then you also have your record drawings or as-built drawings coming out of that to show, okay, how did what was eventually built, how did that differ from what was shown on the plans and specs? So as you go through those, there are some other requirements that you may have to consider as well. One being an RSA determination. So this is basically anytime you touch the runway beyond just preventative maintenance. So if I'm doing an overlay, I have to go out and assess the runway safety area to make sure that's in compliance. An RPZ alternatives analysis study, so I touched on this briefly. It's just anytime we have incompatible land use that enters like a new or modified RPZ. AGIS survey, Jordan mentioned this. That's not just on your ALP updates. If you have any changes to safety critical data, then you have to do the AGIS survey along with that project as well. So safety critical data, what does that really consist of? Think the threshold location or even elevation, the location of nav aids, obstructions. Obstructions would be safety critical data. So when we've got changes to that, we really have to incorporate the AGIS survey to make sure that that's current as well. Some other ones to think about, especially from your role or responsibility, 5010 master record updates. So that's a responsibility of the airport. That's not something that we're able to manage for you. So anytime you have a development project that modifies airport features that would be listed on your 5010, that's something that you want to make sure that you're covering. So if we're impacting the PCN, if we're impacting runway length, think about all the things that are on the 5010. So if that project affects those, then we need to incorporate that update as well. If we've got any type of geometric change to the airfield pavements, connectors, the size of aprons, anything like that, then we also need an as-built ALP to reflect. So, and that's really more of the ALD. And then airport chart or diagram modifications. So think about everything that might be published in your approach charts, even the airport diagram that shows the connectors and the layout. So these are all things that we have to consider, and it might be your role or responsibility to handle those that we are not able to do, nor your airport consultant, particularly with the 5010 and the airport chart or diagram modifications. So I want you to keep all of these in mind as you're not only as you're going through those different phases and sub-phases for your capital improvement, but just what are some of those other requirements that I may have to do. And your airport consultant can help you through that process with developing anything that might have to be included. So